Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Beitza. This is our fourth lesson, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 24, Chaf Dalid, through Daf 30, Daf Lamed, which is today's Daf. And I just want to wish everybody a Shavua Tov and almost Shabbat Shalom. I hope everyone had a wonderful Sukkot. It's been a little crazy. Every week we've been learning on a different day, but I really appreciate, first of all, those who come live and those who are downloading it and listening to this shiur when they have a chance. I really appreciate it. And Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we will be back to our regular schedule, which is every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Israel time. So let's get started. We're actually going to start and finish the third chapter, the third perek in Masechet Beitza, at the bottom of Daf 23, Chaf Gimel. And I have some pictures. Again, I thank Daf HaChaim for their amazing illustrations. So this chapter is actually going to be discussing things we can do on the festival, on the Chag, or things that we need to do beforehand. We have mentioned this previously, or we know that you're allowed to do things that have to do with food preparation on the festival itself. The question is, how far do we extend that permissibility? Is anything able to be done, or only certain things? So that's what this chapter is going to discuss. So the Mishnah tells us that you cannot trap fish from a pond on the festival, and you can't feed them because they can get their own food, right? As you see here, even if you have a small pond, you still need to catch the fish. So if you still need to catch the fish, so that's not considered trapped enough, and therefore that is not permissible on the festival. The next idea is that you can trap or take birds and wild animals from a corral on the festival. As you can see here, right, if there's already an enclosure that the animals are in and all you need to do is reach in and take them, then that would be okay. And you can feed them on the festival because they rely on you for their food. So the Gemara on Daf 24 tells us that if they are lacking some sort of trapping, meaning some sort of activity, then you cannot trap them on the festival. But if they're already considered trapped and all you need to do is reach in and take them, then that would be okay. So the Gemara continues and says that if you have this enclosure, you actually cannot take the animals from this enclosure. So how does that work? So the question is going to be, how big is the enclosure? So the Gemara explains that if you trap an animal, let's say in a house, then it is considered trapping. So let's say if it was Shabbat, where we know that trapping is not allowed, so then you would be liable if let's say you trapped the deer in your house, that you would be liable for trapping. But again, maybe the Gemara says maybe it depends on how big the area is, right? If it's a very large area, so then that's not considered sufficiently trapped for the festival. If it's a small enclosure and you can just like reach in and get it, then it's considered significantly trapped already. Or maybe the issue is not necessarily size, but the structure itself, meaning if there are corners that the animal can hide in, then it would be problematic. But if it's small, then it would be okay. And again, the halacha is that, like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that if you need to trap to get the animal, so then that's not considered trapped again, and then that would not be okay on the festival. Then the Gemara talks about birds, right? If birds come back to the house at night, let's say to the nest, then it's considered trapped already. These are especially geese and chicken. So then, and they rely on you for their food, so then that would be okay. If they don't rely on you for their food, so then it's not considered trapped. Doves and pigeons, if they try to fly away from you, so then that's not considered trapped, and that's not enough in order to designate them for the festival. Um, Again, the Gemara says that you can only use animals that were caught before the festival. Again, if you're not sure if these are the animals, so then it is not allowed to use them. But if you caught them before and you're not sure if these are the right animals, again, you're not allowed to use them. The Gemara explains that they used to set these traps and they could see that the nets got tangled, meaning that there must be an animal inside. So if you saw that it was tangled, even if you didn't see the animal that was inside, you can assume that the animal was trapped there from before the festival. From here, the Gemara continues and talks about that you can accept food from a non-Jew on the festival that was picked that day. Or maybe the Gemara says, no, you can't handle this fruit because it's muktzah, meaning it wasn't prepared or designated before the festival, and therefore you cannot use this animal, but this food. But if the fruit was picked from the day before, so then you can use it and you can eat it on the festival. Daf 25 tells us that if you close a stream before the festival, and basically, right, let's say you have a stream in your backyard and you close it off before the festival, that in essence traps all the fish inside. So then all the fish inside this area are considered designated and you can eat them on the festival, right? Our original point was we were in a pond, you go out to the pond in your backyard, that it was you didn't designate those fish before the festival, but because you closed off the stream, then it is considered as if it was designated before the festival, and you can eat those fish on the festival. What about a newborn animal that's in the orchard? A chaya here is a wild animal like a deer. What if that newborn deer is in your orchard? It's considered designated because it can't go anywhere. And therefore, you don't have to do an added activity, and you can eat that animal on the festival. Or maybe it does need designation before the festival, right? Which is called zimun. You have to designate it before the festival, or not. The Gemara continues and says that if you designated birds in a nest, and we actually did this in the beginning of the Masechet, and then you found the birds outside of the nest the next day, right? What are we concerned about? That the birds in the nest flew away, and now these are new birds. Therefore, you cannot eat those birds. And if you wanted to eat them, so you would have to tie down their wings before the festival to ensure that they can't fly away. And then you know that they're the same animals. The Gemara then goes back to our case of the deer in the orchard. Maybe you only need designation for the mother, or no, maybe we're just talking about the baby. Even though the baby can't walk away, maybe you do need to designate it before the festival. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 25 tells us that if an animal is dying on a festival, and you already ate, right? Let's say it's after lunch, you've already eaten, you're so full, it's the afternoon, we can all relate after being after many days of a festival. But here the Gemara says there's no way you would eat any of this meat on the festival itself. You cannot slaughter the animal, right? Again, the only reason we're allowed to slaughter the animal is if we were going to eat it. So if there's no way you would eat this animal on the festival, you cannot slaughter the animal. But if you have time to roast it and eat a kazait, right, a significant portion, which is again like an olive volume, then you can slaughter the animal and eat the meat. Let's say you slaughter the animal out in a field. This is a regular animal. The Gemara says that you can't bring it into town on a pole, right? They used to kind of tie the legs of the animal and put it on a pole, and then you'd carry the pole into the town. The Gemara says not for carrying, because we know that you are actually allowed to carry on a festival. Rather, it looks like you're doing weekday work. And here we're going to get into the whole topic of, I guess, what my parents used to say, pasnisht. It's not nice. It doesn't look nice on a festival to be doing things that look like you're working. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute, but it's not, you're not honoring the festival. As we know, on the festival, we put on our festive clothing. We do things that are calmer, more relaxed. We shouldn't appear to be working. We definitely should not be appearing that we'll see as we go on other ideas. But right now, so we said we shouldn't carry the animal with this pole, either because it is more strenuous or because it looks like you're working. And what should you do? Rather, you should cut it up and bring it in piece by piece. So now, even though that is going to make you walk back and forth maybe more than you would normally need to, but because you're carrying a small amount, it's not an issue, and that is what you should be doing. The Gemara continues and talks about a butcher, and it says that he needs to flay and cut up the meat before selling it, like they do with the sacrifices in the temple. Maybe, again, this is to parallel what they did in the temple. Maybe it's that he needs to check that it isn't a treifa. Treifa means an animal that was going to die in a certain amount of time. This animal is not considered kosher, and therefore you cannot eat it. Or the Gemara suggests that no, it's not for a legal reason, for a halachic reason. Rather, it's just the proper way to act, and it's not really to check the animal. Meaning, when you slaughter the animal, we assume that it is kosher. Again, we do check certain areas, but this cutting up is not because we need to. From here, the Gemara continues, since we were talking about the proper way to sell meat, the Gemara talks about the proper way to drink wine, that you should take 2 sips, not 1, not 3, but 2 sips, and that's the proper way to drink. Again, this is not a law, it's not a halacha, rather it's a suggestion. From here, the Gemara very interestingly talks about learning certain lessons about values or morality from different plants. And it goes through different plants, their roots, how they grow, how they behave, and we're supposed to learn from those plants how to be. Right, so the Gemara continues and talks about the Torah being given to the Jewish people because they're strong and they can handle it. As we just read, actually on Simchat Torah, we read that the Torah is Eish Da'at Lamo, right? That the Torah is fiery words. So the Gemara says the Jewish people are a fiery nation, and therefore they can handle the fiery Torah, and it's very powerful. The Gemara continues back to things that we're allowed to or not allowed to do on the festival. It says that a blind person cannot use a walking stick if he doesn't really need it on Shabbat, right? Again, it's seen as a weekday activity. It's seen as a burden. He's carrying it. Again, this is not to say if a blind person needs their walking stick, obviously they can use it. Here we're talking about if they don't need it, and then they are not allowed to take it out. Okay, again, and the same idea that you can carry someone on a chair on the festival if he's needed to give a shi'ur, right? If that's the way he travels, so you can carry him on the festival if he is needed. If not, then no. Okay. Next, okay, Daf 26. We have the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is going to discuss an animal that falls into a pit. But let's first understand what this animal is. So the Bechor, meaning the firstborn animal, needs to be given to the Kohen, to the priest, in order to be eaten in the temple in Jerusalem. However, if this animal gets a permanent blemish, then it does not need to be taken to the temple, and the Kohen, the priest, can eat it in his house. Now, the animal needs to be seen by an expert who needs to determine if this blemish is okay, is permanent or not. So the, we have another picture. So the Gemara says that if the Bechor, this firstborn animal, falls into a pit on the festival, so then the expert can go into the pit and see this, and see this blemish. Now, if it's a permanent blemish, so then the owner can take it out of the pit and slaughter it. The Gemara, the Mishnah adds that this this blemish needed to be on the animal before the festival, and therefore he knew about it beforehand. Rabbi Shimon says that if he didn't see the blemish before the festival, then the expert cannot go and see it before. Sorry, again. Rabbi Shimon says that if you didn't see the blemish before the festival, then the expert cannot come and see the blemish on the festival itself. So let's try to understand what we're talking about. Again, the expert needs to come and determine if this blemish is permanent or not, and then the Kohen, the priest, can eat it. So the Gemara says, what are we talking about? Right? Maybe the argument is about if an expert can see blemishes on the festival, right? Meaning when the expert comes, he's actually sitting in judgment. He's passing a rule or a ruling. And therefore that might be a problem on the festival. Or the Gemara says, no, maybe the person took it out of the pit without asking, right? He didn't first bring in the expert first, but rather he took it out of the pit first, and then he brought the expert. And if it just developed this blemish when it fell in, so then that is not okay. We cannot have this animal on the festival because, again, it was not designated before the festival, and therefore it's muktzah, and you cannot eat this animal on the festival. So now there's a Beitzah that says, wait, maybe this firstborn animal, the Bechor, fell into the pit when it was unblemished, meaning it did not have the blemish before it fell in. Now, again, it says that the expert can go down into the pit, and if there's a blemish, then you can bring it up and you can slaughter the animal right there and then on the festival. Okay, again, now the Gemara adds, no, the blemish needed to be there before the festival. Maybe the animal was born with this blemish, and if that is the case, then the expert can see it on the festival itself because you saw it already before the festival. Okay, so let's continue. We're continuing on Daf 26, and the Gemara asks if there is something. Okay, so we have the concept of muktzah, right? Muktzah being something that was not designated before the festival. So the Gemara asks, is there muktzah for part of Shabbat and then all of Shabbat? What does that mean? So the example that's given is, let's say you have figs and grapes that are drying on a roof. Now, at the beginning of Shabbat, these fruits were inedible. You didn't think you were going to eat them. So now they were muktzah, right? They were not set aside. Then that means for the rest of Shabbat, even though in the middle of Shabbat now they're edible, the fact that they were not edible at the beginning of Shabbat means you cannot eat them the whole Shabbat. Um, but if they were fit to eat at the beginning of Shabbat, and then at some point they became not fit, they rained on them and they're not good, and then it dried again, then they become fit again to eat. Now the question is, does that what's the case, right? Meaning it was fit, then not edible, then fit again to be eaten. The Gemara says this is considered muktzah. You cannot eat it. Or the Gemara says no, maybe it's not muktzah, right? And here the Gemara says let's learn it from our Mishnah, meaning before the animal was born, you could have eaten it when it was inside the mother, right? We learned this in another Masechet that if you slaughter the mother, and you find a baby inside, you can eat the baby without slaughtering it, without anything. But then it was born, and now you cannot eat it. Again, it's a bechor. And then it got this blemish, and now you can eat it again. So the question is, it seems that you can eat it. So the Gemara says, no, you have to designate it before that you want to eat it. Like let's say the fruit, so you have to designate it before Shabbat that you want to eat it, and then it's okay, right? As long as it was fit before Shabbat, then it's okay. Now, if it became muktzah for part of the Shabbat, so then that's it. You cannot eat it for the rest of Shabbat. Or, again, the Gemara gives another opinion. No, it's not about muktzah, and here we were talking about it being edible and then non-edible in the middle of Shabbat. But the Gemara says rather, what's the case? That it is half edible before Shabbat, and then, right, meaning you couldn't eat it before Shabbat, but it's halfway. So the case is, let's say you have beans and lentils that are cooked on the festival, right? So before you started cooking it, they were raw, you can chew on them. Now you started cooking them, and now you can't really eat them till they're completely cooked. This seems that to prove that there's no such thing as muktzah for part of the festival. Now we're on Daf 27, and the Gemara says, no, it's dependent on the person, not muktzah, right? If it's out, so if it's out of your control, like we were talking about fruit drying on the roof, so then if it's out of your control, the question is if there's like half muktzah. But if it's part of your control and you have control over it, so then it would be okay. All right, let's go back to our bechor. So the Gemara says that the argument is if this expert can check the bechor, the firstborn animal, on the festival. And here there are stories of sages who refuse to check animals on the festival. Okay. The Gemara continues on 27 and tells us that if you slaughtered the bechor and then you saw the blemish, now you cannot eat that animal. You have to check it before you slaughter the animal. This is according to Rabbi Meir. And therefore is that the halacha is that you cannot check the bechor on the festival itself, meaning you had to have checked it before the festival. Or, says the Gemara, no, the machloket is about an internal blemish, meaning something that you can't, that changes. The Gemara gives the example of cataracts, that when you slaughter the animal, it changes, and now you don't know what the blemish was beforehand or not. And therefore, if that's going to change, everybody agrees that you cannot determine this blemish after the slaughter, and therefore it is prohibited to check this animal and slaughter it because it's a penalty, right? And we don't want you to check it on the festival. Okay. The next case on 27 was Rav Ami, who checks these blemishes before the festival. And on the festival, he would ask the Kohanim when the blemish started, meaning he would look at it and determine and make a ruling beforehand. But on the festival itself, he was able to ask questions of the Kohen, of the priest. Um, Again, the idea here is that the priest doesn't want to go to Jerusalem to eat the animal. He'd rather eat it in his own backyard. So he does have an interest in wanting there to be a permanent blemish on the animal. The Gemara then asks, what about indirectly causing a blemish? Again, the Kohen is not allowed to directly cause a blemish, but what about indirectly causing a blemish? Would that be a problem? So the Gemara says again, directly is a problem, but it is even problematic to indirectly cause one of these blemishes. Okay, the next Mishnah on 27 talks about an animal that died on the festival. So the Gemara says you cannot, the Mishnah says you cannot move it because it's muktzah, right? It doesn't have any use on the festival itself, and therefore you cannot move it. However, challah, right? Challah that became impure, right? Again, in the times of the Mishnah, challah was given in purity to the priest, and he would eat it with purity. If it became impure, so now it must be destroyed. Therefore, also it too is muktzah, and it cannot be moved. Or, says the Gemara, maybe you can cut it up and give it to your dogs. Again, this animal that died on the festival. Okay. All right. So let's go. The next Mishnah says you can't group together to buy an animal together on the festival. Again, it's interesting to think about this in today's world, right? We know that Jewish stores are closed on a festival, right? We don't go shopping on a festival. But in those days where there's no refrigeration and you are allowed to cook on the festival, so the butcher would actually be open on the festival. And again, as we saw, you can slaughter the animals, you can acquire the meat. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So the Gemara says that you can't make a group on the festival to buy this animal. Again, now we're getting into this idea of doing business on the festival. You can make a group before, and then you can slaughter together as a group the animal on the festival, and you can divide it. So what do? The Gemara says that you can actually, let's say you do have this group and you want to buy this animal, you could bring two animals that are of equal value, you slaughter one of them, and then you evaluate the live one after the festival, right? You say, oh, I got one just like this, so now tell me how much I owe you. And then you can figure out how much each person owes. At the top of 29, the Gemara tells us that this is called uvda dechol, right? We're doing things that, now we're going to be discussing things that are, I guess, activities you would normally do on a weekday. As we mentioned before, it's not honoring the festival to do these things on the festival itself. Again, they aren't necessarily, we'll see, some things are really prohibited. Others are not really a prohibition. Rather, it's not in the spirit of the law. So the Mishnah at the top of 28 tells us that a butcher, right, again, remember, we're getting the meat on the festival. So the butcher can weigh the meat. And again, on the other side, instead of, they used to put weights on the other side, right? Each one would say, half a pound, 1 kilo, 2 kilo, right? And that's how you figured out how much the meat weighed. So you can't use those weights on Shabbat. That's called doing business on Shabbat. Rather, he can take an object, you can see here like a meat cleaver, and he could put it on the scale, and then you get a cleaver's worth of meat. And then later on, after after the festival, you can figure out how much the person owes you. Um, the sages, however, say you can't use the scale at all. Again, the scale looks like you're doing business, and that is not okay on the festival. The Gemara says that, again, the scale looks like work that you do during the week, and that's why it's problematic. The Gemara continues and gives us other weighing issues, right? So the butcher can't weigh meat in his hand because, again, if you've been to the butcher, right, a lot of times, when you get to the counter and you say, give me a kilo, and somehow they miraculously measure out a kilo without, afterwards they put it on the scale, but they already know with their eyes, right, what it looks like, or they can feel with their hands. So if this is the way the butcher usually weighs his meat, so then he shouldn't do this. Again, it's called uvda d'chol, uvdin d'chol. It is like work that you normally do during the week. The Gemara continues. What you can also you cannot use water as a measurement, right? They used to weigh, I guess, the displacement of the water is again measuring, and that would be problematic. Again, this is just as an aside, an issue on Shabbat. Let's say there's an issue of me. I'm not paskening, but there's an issue using measuring cups on Shabbat. Right? You shouldn't be measuring things out on Shabbat. This is where it comes from, right? That it doesn't look, it looks like you're doing business. Measuring equals business, and therefore you shouldn't do it on Shabbat or on the festival. So the Gemara continues and says that you can weigh one piece opposite another piece. That would be fine. And that would be okay. Okay. The next Mishnah talks about sharpening knives, right? Again, you're going to slaughter an animal. You want the knife very sharp. So really, the Gemara will talk about this, right? You could have done this before the festival. So sharpen your knives before the festival. Don't do it on the festival, right? So the Mishnah says you cannot sharpen your knife in the normal way, right? Using the stone or right, so the stone, but you can scrape it against another knife, or you can sharpen it on wood. Interestingly, someone in my Gemara group showed a picture that you can actually sharpen your knife on the back of a ceramic plate, which I did not know. But again, if it's we'll see the idea of it being a shinui. If you're doing it differently, then it would be okay. But let's say you're using this sharpening stone, but you're using it actually to scrape the fat off of the knife. That is okay. Or no, maybe you can't use this stone at all, and you have to just use another knife. Again, there's a difference between Shabbat and the festival. What's the difference? Food preparation, right? We talked about being able to prepare food on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, on the festival, not on Shabbat. And here there's a machloket. What is considered food preparation? Is it everything from A to Z, or is it the actual things that need to be done on the festival? But if you could do things beforehand, like sharpening your knife, then you should do it beforehand. And here we get stories of different sages who sharpen their knives on the festival. And the Gemara explains that if you can still use the knife, so then you can sharpen it, meaning if the knife is functional the way it is, so then you can sharpen it a little bit more on the festival. But if you cannot use it at all, meaning it's completely dull, so now you can't start from the beginning. That's going to be a much longer process. Again, as we said, only food preparation is permissible and not those preliminary actions, or maybe lachem, right? Meaning God tells us that the festival is for us, and therefore anything that has to do with food preparation would be permitted. What about a bent spit, right? A shipud, right? A skewer. So the Gemara says that you cannot fix it on the festival, even if it's just to bend it back, because Again, a used a skewer can't be moved because it's dirty, right? It becomes mukta, meaning unusable. Or maybe you can move it like to a corner, or maybe it has to have some meat on it and then you can move it. Um, or even if it doesn't have meat on it, we know it's dangerous and therefore we want to get rid of it and you are allowed to move it. And here, interesting, there's kind of like a tangent. The Gemara talks about three statements of Malkiyo, and then um, uh, comes up with three more statements of Rav Malkiah. And here the Gemara says, don't confuse the two, Rav Malkiyo and Rav Malkiah. Um, Rav Malkiah comments on Mishnayot, and Rav Malkiyo comments on the Amoraic statements. Okay, the next Mishnah on the bottom of Daf 28 um, tells us that you can't tell the butcher to sell you an amount of meat based on value, right? You can't say, give me $10 worth of meat, 10 shekel worth of meat. But you can slaughter the animal and then distribute the meat in pieces, right? You can give me a thigh, give me a leg. That's okay. Again, when we're in the supermarket, sometimes we'll say, give me $10 worth of, and that's how you do business. So the Gemara on the top of 29 tells us that there are like standard sizes of meat. So you can say, right, give me a thigh, give me a leg. And as long as you don't mention money, that's okay. And here the Gemara tells us directly that you cannot use a measuring cup on the festival. Again, it looks like you're doing business, and therefore it is not okay. On the festival, or even during the week, when you're measuring out liquids, you need to let them settle or for the foam to dissipate when you're measuring things. Again, here now we're going to, I would say, proper business dealings. The Gemara is telling us that you can, you need to be careful, right? If someone asks for a kilo, right, or let's say a liter of soda, right, and you pour soda into the pitcher, right, we know that half of that pitcher is going to be filled with foam, and you didn't get a liter of soda, right? So here the Gemara is telling us that you have to be very careful when in your business dealings to give accurate measurements of whatever you're selling. So the Gemara here tells us that again these measurings need to be accurate. And here, okay, so here the Gemara tells us that there were these storekeepers who were very stringent, and they decided to kind of figure out how much they were imprecise with their measurement. They gathered all of that oil and wine, and then they brought it to the temple treasury, and they said, look, we don't know what to do because we really owe the people of our town, right, all of this oil and wine because we didn't kind of wait and we weren't very accurate in our measurements. So the treasurer told them that they need to distribute the money or right the value of what they have to the community, right? Here the Gemara tells us that if you steal something and you don't know whose it was, so then you give back to the community. So the treasurer says, use the money to dig water cisterns, right? Everybody in the community needs a water cistern. Therefore, use that money for the greater good of the people. And here the Gemara continues on 29 that you cannot measure out barley to give to an animal, but you can scoop it out directly, and then put it in front of the animal, because that doesn't look like you're measuring. The same thing here that you can't measure out flour to make dough. You can measure the flour that's going into making dough on the festival because you want to know how much challah to separate, and that's based on how much flour you put into the dough. And therefore, that is okay. And since we're talking about flour, Now we move on to sifting. And here the Gemara explains that basically the flour was sifted twice. Once it was sifted, so here the Gemara says that you cannot sift flour on the festival. You also can't re-sift the flour. Or, right, again, maybe it is okay, meaning the first sifting, which usually happens in the field, that you cannot do. But the second time, maybe that would be okay. The Gemara says you cannot pick something out by hand because that's really borer, that's separating. You can do it with a shinui. And we're going to talk about shinui, a change, in a minute. The Mishnah then tells us that you can go to the storekeeper who knows you and say, give me a certain number of eggs or nuts. And that is not considered business because that's something that you would do at home. Right? You would say, pass me 3 eggs. So if I go to the supermarket, to the grocery store, and I say, can I have 3 eggs? That is okay. The same thing, you can go to the butcher and say, give me, right, a shoulder, a leg, that's okay, or give me a loaf. All these things, as long as you don't mention value or price, then you're okay. And that is the end of the 3rd chapter of Masechet Beitza. We're going to do one more daf. We're going to start the 4th chapter. And here we're going to talk about, again, things that look like you're doing work. So the Mishnah says that if you want to bring wine from one place to another, so you cannot carry it in a box like this. Again, this is uvdin dechol. It looks like you're working. It looks like you're, right, the mover or the wine delivery guy. Rather, you can do it, as you can see here on the right. You can do it 1 at a time or 2 at a time, right? Not more. The same thing about bringing straw to animals, as long as you carry it in your hand, so that's okay, right? But carrying it on your shoulder is not okay. And the Gemara says that you can use this straw. Okay, it says you can use this straw that you just brought in for the animals. You can use it for firewood, but you can't use wood that was in the storage facility, right, in the storage area, because that's called mukta, where it's actually in the mukta. Right here it's saying it's put away for storage, and since you didn't designate it before the festival, you cannot use it on the festival. So the Gemara on Daf 30 tells us that, again, here we're talking about doing things with a shinui, right? Doing it with a change, some sort of difference. Now, what if you can't do a shinui? So then the Gemara says you cannot do it in the normal way, right? So let's say if you try carrying things in a different way and an easier way, then that would be great. Or with a change, even if it's maybe not easier, but equally the same. And what about if it's more difficult? That's the question, right? So if the Gemara says you should try to do the shinui on Yom Tov. If you can't, then you can use it in the regular way. Like the Gemara gives a case of women going to the well to bring water. Any shinui, any change in that process would be much worse, right? Smaller pitchers, they would have to go back and forth more. Larger pitchers, they'd have to work harder. So the Gemara says, you know what, forget it. Just do it the way you do it in the normal way. That's okay. The Gemara here then says that you shouldn't clap or dance on a festival, lest it lead you to fixing musical instruments on the festival. But excuse me. Sorry. But today the Gemara says people do clap and dance. So what's going on here? And here's a concept that the Gemara suggests here, which is called Hanach Lahem Yisrael, which means we let the Jewish people do what they're doing. What does that mean? The Gemara explains that it's better to let people transgress something without knowing, right, inadvertently, rather than tell them that it's prohibited and then they do it on purpose. Meaning, if you know that telling them is not going to change their action, it's better not to tell them at all and let them do it again, bishogeg, meaning inadvertently, as opposed to doing it on purpose. Um, the Gemara continues and says that you can use stored animal food for firewood, as we mentioned before, the straw. It is not considered muktzah, according to Rabbi Shimon, but you cannot use cedar wood, right? Cedar wood was specifically used for building. It's very expensive, therefore it is considered muktzah, meaning not able to be used on the festival. The next Mishnah, and the last Mishnah we're going to do today, talks about, and this was perfect learning right after Sukkot. So the Mishnah says that you cannot take wood from the schach, from the sukkah on the festival, because it's considered soter, right? Soter meaning destruction, which is a malacha. It is an action that is prohibited. Here, the Gemara is going to tell us we're not talking about a sukkah on Sukkot. Rather, we're talking about a hut that's in your backyard. It's a springtime and you have this hut. You cannot take the wood from the roof because you're destroying this structure. But you can take the extra wood. You can see here that's on the side. The question is, the Gemara asks, where is this extra wood, right? Is it on the wall, right, out next to the wall? Is it on top of the roof? But either way, it's not considered soter, it's not considered destruction, and therefore it is okay for you to use it. But if it was, here the Gemara says that if it was in bundles, so then you can use it because you haven't spread it out yet. But on Sukkot, you cannot take anything from the sukkah. Right, we actually learned this in Masechet Sukkah. The Gemara says that a sukkah that fell down, you can take the wood, and it's not muktzah. And the Gemara explains, no, this was a shaky sukkah, which you knew was going to fall down on the festival. So you already had in mind before the festival that when it falls, you're going to use that wood. Again, the Gemara says that a sukkah, again, on Sukkot, if you make a stipulation that you want to use the wood of the sukkah, maybe you can use it. The Gemara says no, you cannot use the wood of a sukkah on Sukkot because it has sanctity, it has kedusha, and therefore you cannot use it. But if you stipulate using the decorations of the sukkah, then that is okay because it does not get sanctity at the beginning of the festival. And here the Gemara talks about, right, if you had 7 etrogim for 7 days of Sukkot, then every day you can use your etrog and lulav, and that night you can eat the etrog. How is it possible? Because at night you already fulfilled the mitzvah, and there's this break at night, and therefore the etrog is able to be eaten. But the sukkah, because it's one long continuous mitzvah, you cannot use the wood from the sukkah because it is one continuous mitzvah, one continuous commandment, and therefore you cannot use that wood. With that, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, wishing you a beautiful Shabbat, Shabbat Breshit. We're going to read Breshit, the first parsha in the Torah, so everyone enjoy that. And I will see you next Tuesday, right? Actually, in a few days, less than a week from now. So wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and really wonderful to see all of you, and see you next week. Hopefully, we will have more people on our regular day and time. We will go back to, in Israel, we have a concept called after the Chagim. Achrei HaChagim is where everything goes back to normal. So wishing everybody a wonderful Shabbat, and see you next week.